Hello there, my scholarly friend. And tonight we delve into mysteries that even Tolfdir never dared to teach. Deep within the College of Winterhold's restricted archives, where ancient magical artifacts pulse with forgotten power, a story waits that could reshape everything we know about the origins of magic in Tamriel. So, light your candles, open your mind to the impossible, and let the whispers of long-dead mages guide you through this tale. The storm that raged across Winterhold that night was unlike any the college had seen in decades. Master Wizard Lyralei Starweaver pressed her face against the frost-covered window of the Arch-Mage's tower, watching as the aurora borealis twisted and writhed above the ancient stones with an intensity that made her magical senses tingle. Lightning crackled, not with the usual blue-white energy of natural storms, but with the deep purple hues that spoke of magical disturbance, the kind that occurred when the barriers between planes grew thin. As the college's newest keeper of ancient texts, Lyralei had access to archives that most mages never knew existed. 3 levels beneath the main library, past wards that had been woven by archmages dead for centuries, lay the restricted collection, a vault containing the most dangerous magical knowledge ever compiled. Tonight, the storm's unusual magical resonance had awakened something in those depths, something that called to her with a voice like wind through ancient stone. The journey down to the restricted levels required more than just her master key. Each level was protected by increasingly complex magical barriers, tests designed to ensure that only those with sufficient understanding and discipline could access the knowledge within. The first ward required her to solve a puzzle of elemental balance, carefully weaving flames, frost, and shock together in perfect harmony. The second tested her knowledge of the theoretical foundations of magic, demanding she recite the 17 principles of ethereal manipulation from memory. But it was the third ward that gave her pause. Unlike the academic challenges above, this barrier required something far more personal, a demonstration of what the ancient texts called true sight, the ability to perceive magic not as mortals understood it, but as it truly existed in its raw, unfiltered form. Lyralei closed her eyes and reached out with senses that went beyond the 5 physical ones, feeling for the currents of magical energy that flowed through all things. What she saw when her perception shifted made her gasp. The College of Winterhold wasn't built on solid ground. It was built on a nexus, a point where multiple streams of magical energy converged from across Tamriel and beyond. She could see the ley lines stretching out like golden threads, connecting not just to other magical sites across Skyrim, but to places that existed in entirely different planes of reality. The college hadn't been built here by accident. It had been deliberately constructed to tap into this convergence point. The third ward recognized her newfound understanding and dissolved like morning mist, revealing a circular chamber that defied the architectural logic of the building above. The room was far larger than should have been possible, given the tower's dimensions, its walls lined with crystalline formations that pulsed with soft, multicolored light. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal holding what appeared to be a simple leather-bound journal, but Lyralei's enhanced perception could see the powerful preservation enchantments woven around it. As she approached the journal, symbols began to appear on its cover, not written in any alphabet she recognized, but somehow still comprehensible to her mind. The True History of Magic in Tamriel, the title read, as recorded by Arch-Mage Shalidor in the final years of the First Era. Lyralei's hands trembled as she opened the ancient tome. Shalidor was a figure of legend, credited with founding the original college and advancing magical understanding beyond anything achieved before or since. If this was truly his personal record. The first pages contained diagrams and notes that challenged everything she thought she knew about magic. According to Shalidor's research, the conventional understanding of magic as energy drawn from Aetherius through the holes torn by Magnus and his followers was only partially correct. Yes, raw magical energy did flow from that plane of pure magic, but it didn't arrive in Tamriel unchanged. Instead, it was being filtered, modified, and in some cases deliberately corrupted by an intermediate source. Shalidor's investigations had led him to a discovery that terrified him. Magic, as experienced by mortals, was not a natural force, but an artificial construct. Someone or something had created a vast network of filters and conduits that transformed the pure energy of Aetherius into something that mortal minds could comprehend and manipulate. But this transformation came at a cost. The filtered magic was far weaker than its original form, and it carried with it certain influences that shaped how it could be used. The deeper Lyralei read, the more disturbing Shalidor's findings became. His research suggested that the entire system of magical schools, destruction, restoration, illusion, and the rest, was not a natural categorization of magical effects, but a set of artificial limitations imposed by whoever had created the filtering system. Raw, ethereal energy could theoretically accomplish anything, but the modified version that reached Tamriel was constrained to operate within specific parameters. But who had the power to create such a system? Shalidor's journal pointed to evidence that the modifications had been made during the Dawn Era, that mythical time when the very laws of reality were still being established. His research had uncovered the traces of a massive magical working, something on a scale that dwarfed even the most ambitious projects of the Dwemer. The working appeared to have been collaborative, involving multiple groups with different magical traditions, but the central architect remained frustratingly elusive. As Lyralei turned the pages, she began to piece together Shalidor's theory. The legendary disappearance of the Dwemer wasn't just a tragedy or a mystery. It was connected to their discovery of the truth about magic itself. The deep folk had been master craftsmen and enchanters, but their approach to magic was fundamentally different from that of other races. They didn't just use magic. They studied its underlying structure with the same systematic approach they applied to their mechanical engineering. Shalidor believed that the Dwemer had discovered the filtering system and had begun working to bypass it, to access the raw power of Aetherius directly. Their sudden vanishing wasn't a failed experiment or divine punishment. It was a defensive response by the system itself. The Dwemer hadn't disappeared. They had been forcibly relocated to prevent them from dismantling the magical framework that governed all of Tamriel. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. According to Shalidor's final entries, he had not only confirmed the existence of the filtering system, but had identified its creator. The network of magical conduits and limitations had been built by Magnus himself, not as a cruel restriction on mortal potential, but as a protection. The god of magic had realized that unrestricted access to ethereal energy would eventually destroy Tamriel itself, as mortals lacked the wisdom to use such power responsibly. Magnus had designed the system to gradually increase in complexity and sophistication as mortal understanding advanced. Each generation of mages would push against the apparent limits of their art, and in doing so, they would trigger the next phase of the system's evolution. What appeared to be stagnation or limitation was actually careful, controlled growth designed to prevent magical development from outpacing moral and philosophical development. The journal's most disturbing revelation was that this system was beginning to break down. Shalidor had detected increasing instabilities in the magical network, fluctuations that suggested the carefully maintained balance was failing. His calculations indicated that complete system collapse was not only possible, but inevitable. And when it happened, the resulting cascade of unrestricted ethereal energy would likely tear holes in reality itself. Shalidor's proposed solution was as brilliant as it was terrifying. He intended to create a new type of mage, individuals who could perceive and manipulate the filtering system directly rather than working through it. These ethereal architects would serve as living components of the magical network, using their own consciousness to stabilize and maintain the delicate balance that kept Tamriel from being consumed by raw magical energy. But the transformation required to become an ethereal architect was profound and irreversible. The volunteer would need to have their consciousness partially merged with the magical network, gaining incredible power and understanding at the cost of their individual identity. They would become something between mortal and force of nature, eternal guardians of the system that made safe magic possible. The journal's final entries described Shalidor's preparation for his own transformation. He had identified several other candidates among the college's most advanced mages, individuals who possessed both the necessary skill and the philosophical maturity to handle such responsibility. The ritual would take place during a rare celestial alignment, when the barriers between planes were naturally weakened, allowing for the consciousness transfer to occur without completely destroying the participants' minds. As Lyralei read Shalidor's final words, she realized with growing excitement and terror that the conditions he described were occurring tonight. The unusual storm, the dancing aurora, the resonant magic that had drawn her to the archives. It was all part of the same celestial event that Shalidor had waited for over 1,000 years ago. But if he had performed the ritual, why was his journal still here? Why weren't there ethereal architects maintaining the magical system? The answer came in a series of loose pages tucked between the journal's final entry and its back cover. These were written in a different hand, in a more modern style of writing that suggested they had been added much more recently. As Lyralei read, she learned the tragic truth of what had happened to Shalidor's grand plan. The transformation ritual had indeed taken place, but something had gone wrong. Of the 5 mages who had volunteered to become ethereal architects, only Shalidor himself had successfully merged with the magical network. The others had been destroyed by the process, their consciousness scattered across multiple planes of existence. Shalidor found himself alone, bearing the responsibility of maintaining the entire system by himself, a task that was supposed to be shared among multiple individuals. For centuries, Shalidor had struggled to hold the network together single-handedly, but the strain was enormous. The loose pages described his gradual realization that he was failing, that the system was continuing to deteriorate despite his efforts. In desperation, he had attempted to recruit new ethereal architects from among the college's most promising students, but the ritual had been designed for the specific celestial conditions of his era. Attempts to perform it at other times had invariably resulted in failure and death. The final page contained Shalidor's last desperate plan. He would fragment his own consciousness, scattering pieces of himself throughout the magical network like seeds. These fragments would lie dormant until the next occurrence of the proper celestial conditions, at which point they would reach out to individuals with the potential to become ethereal architects. The chosen ones would be drawn to the restricted archives, where they would find his journal and learn the truth about magic's nature and the desperate need for new guardians. As Lyralei finished reading, she felt a presence in the chamber that hadn't been there before. The crystalline formations along the walls began to pulse more rapidly, and she could hear something that might have been a voice, or might have been the wind. Whispers that seemed to come from the journal itself. "You understand now," the whispers said, forming words in her mind rather than her ears. "The system is failing. The filters are breaking down. Without new architects, the cascade failure will begin within a decade, perhaps sooner. The choice is yours, young mage. Will you accept the responsibility that I have carried alone for so long?" Lyralei looked around the chamber with new eyes, seeing not just a repository of ancient knowledge, but a crucial component of the very system that made safe magic possible. She could feel the power flowing through the ley lines beneath her feet, could sense the delicate balance that kept raw ethereal energy from tearing reality apart. She understood now why Shalidor had been willing to sacrifice his individual existence for this greater purpose. But she also understood the cost. To become an ethereal architect meant giving up her life as a mortal mage, abandoning her research, her friends, her dreams of advancing magical knowledge through traditional study. She would become something else entirely, a living component of a system that most mages didn't even know existed. The whispers continued, patient but urgent. "There are others," Shalidor's fragmented consciousness told her. "The celestial alignment draws them here even now. You need not bear this burden alone as I have. Together, a new generation of architects can stabilize the network and guide magical development into safer channels. But the window of opportunity is narrow. The alignment will pass by dawn, and another such convergence may not occur for centuries." As if summoned by his words, Lyralei heard footsteps on the stairs leading down to the restricted archives. Other mages were being drawn to this place, just as she had been. Soon, she would need to make her choice, and she would need to help them understand the choice that faced them as well. She thought of her mentor, Master Tolfdir, who had always emphasized the importance of responsible magical practice. He had often spoken of magic as a gift that came with obligations, though she doubted he had ever imagined obligations quite like this. She thought of her fellow students, pursuing their studies with no idea that the very foundation of their art was maintained by the sacrifice of those who had come before. Most of all, she thought of the future. Not just her own, but the future of magic itself. If Shalidor was right, and she had no reason to doubt his analysis, then magical civilization itself hung in the balance. The choice wasn't really between her current life and transformation. It was between accepting responsibility and watching everything she cared about be destroyed by forces beyond anyone's control. The footsteps were closer now, and she could hear voices. Other mages called by the same mysterious summons that had brought her here. Soon, they would all be faced with the same impossible choice that had confronted Shalidor a millennium ago. But unlike the legendary Arch-Mage, they would not have to face it alone. Lyralei closed the journal and looked around the chamber one last time with purely mortal eyes. Tomorrow, if she chose to accept Shalidor's offer, she would see this place very differently. Not as a room in a building, but as a node in a vast network of magical energy that connected all of Tamriel and beyond. She would understand the true nature of magic, but she would also bear the responsibility of protecting that understanding from those who might abuse it. The choice, as Shalidor had said, was hers. But as the other mages began to descend into the chamber, drawn by forces they didn't yet understand, Lyralei realized that she had already made her decision. The moment she had opened that ancient journal, the moment she had learned the truth about magic's nature, she had accepted the responsibility that came with that knowledge. The storm outside was reaching its peak, and the aurora borealis painted the sky in colors that had no names in any mortal language. In the depths of the College of Winterhold, where ancient magic flowed through crystalline conduits and the wisdom of ages waited to be inherited, a new generation of ethereal architects prepared to take up the burden that Shalidor had carried alone for far too long. As the first of her fellow mages entered the chamber, their faces filled with the same wonder and confusion she had felt just hours before, Lyralei stepped forward to greet them. There was much to explain, and little time to do it. The celestial alignment would not wait for lengthy deliberations or careful preparations. By dawn, they would either have new guardians for the magical network, or they would begin the countdown to the end of safe magic in Tamriel. The whispers of Shalidor's fragmented consciousness filled the chamber like a gentle wind, carrying with them the weight of centuries and the hope of millennia yet to come. In the restricted archives of the College of Winterhold, where the deepest secrets of magic had waited in patient silence, the future of an entire world was about to be decided by a handful of mages who had stumbled upon a truth too important to ignore. And in the crystalline walls that surrounded them, magical energy pulsed with increasing intensity, preparing for a transformation that would either save the system that made their world possible or herald its final catastrophic failure. The choice, as it had always been, lay with those brave enough to accept the responsibility that came with true knowledge of magic's nature. The night was far from over, and the real work was just beginning.